All right, there we go. Hi, everybody. My name is Jimmy. I am an alcoholic. Grateful to be alive and sober. And thank you, Glenn, for the invitation. It's customary where I come from to let you know a few things. One is that I have a home group. It's called the Design for Living Group in Neptune, New Jersey. It's a big book study meeting that meets on Sunday night. I have a sponsor by the name of Bob B. from St. Paul, Minnesota. I have a service sponsor by the name of John Q. I sponsor a lot of men, but most importantly, I've been sober since my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous, and that was on March 28th, 1987. So extremely grateful for this way of life, extremely grateful for Alcoholics Anonymous and to be here with you guys today. My home group is back in person again, so I'm starting to get back into in-person meetings, and it's kind of weird now to go back and forth. I was at a conference last week, and being in person, it felt so good to be in front of people and talk to people, and I don't want to say hug or hold hands, but it just felt, the good old days, right, of being together. And so I'm here from the Jersey Shore, just to give you a little visual. I'm about 60 miles south of New York City on the beach. Live in a beautiful area. The locals like to call it the Irish Riviera. Members of AA like to call it Cirrhosis by the Sea. I mean, it's the Jersey Shore. It is party town city from Memorial Day to last weekend, Labor Day, and now the locals get their beaches back, and we could, walk around without crowds and all that other stuff. But just a place that I love to live here, and it's just great. So I always like to start my story by letting you know that I was born perfect, and I was quickly handed over to these two character defects called mom and dad. And I say that jokingly, but the truth of the matter is, I live under a delusion, and I think maybe many of us do. My alcoholism will always create a lot of delusions, and my one big delusion is that nothing's my fault. And so it's always been very convenient to blame others for the way I feel deep down inside. And it started from an early age with my mother and father. And, I grow up in a family of, there's seven of us. I mean, I grow up in a neighborhood where the only requirement for membership in the neighborhood is 5 or more kids. My parents have always given me everything I've ever needed in life, good morals, good values, education, most importantly. And for whatever reason, I've always taken everything of goodness in my life and rolled it into a nice little package and tried to stuff it right down your throat. Because there's something inside of me, which I don't know what it was until I landed with you fine folk, that there's something inside of me that's just not right, and I don't know how that occurred. I don't know how that starts, but I'm a kid that grows up with great fear. I'm a kid that grows up with great insecurities. I'm a kid that's paralyzed by what you think of me. I mean, I've heard this stuff from a million podiums, but, I just don't know why I feel the way I feel, and I'm growing up. I'm 63 years old. I'm growing up in northern New Jersey. I grew up in a city called Jersey City, which is right across the Hudson River from New York City. I grew up in a very blue-collar neighborhood where everyone's a cop, a fireman, a truck driver, a union worker. There's not many people that put a suit on in my neighborhood. I remember having a neighbor across the street that used to be a pilot for a very old airline that only some of you might know, Eastern Airlines. But when we used to see him walk out of his house in his airline outfit, we were like, oh my God, it's like the president of the United States. We never saw things like that, And from an early age, I'm the kind of family, or maybe really the kind of neighborhood where, your mom opened the door at 8 o'clock in the morning, you left the house, and they knew you would come back eventually. I mean, there was some sort of safety, or there was some sort of, just everything was okay. They knew you would eat somewhere. I mean, you'd walk in a neighbor's house and just make a sandwich, But this is like kind of the setup, because, when you hang on the streets, eventually you're going to become the streets. And that's really my story, not a lot of education. We always joke around, being a guy like Mike P or on the corner, and one of you guys drove by and said, hey, there's a dead bird. We'd both look up. I mean, we're not too bright, but, we're growing up, like wanting to be gangsters, and that's like the kind of life. My parents, my brothers, idols in my life eventually were replaced by the neighborhood bookie, the bartender, the older guys, the guys that were, having fun. And, I'm growing up in this house and, I got this guy called Dad. He's cunning, he's baffling and powerful in his own way. And he's a guy that I'm afraid of. My dad's a really tough guy. He's a Korean War vet. He comes from that generation. If you have a parent that's in their 90s now, but you remember them back in their 40s and 50s, they're lunatics. And my dad was a lunatic. And he was just a guy that, you just never, he was a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, like many of us. You never knew who was going to walk in the door. But every day at 5 o'clock at my house, because back then the moms all stayed home, the dads all worked. Every day at 5 o'clock, I would witness a miracle in my house. 6 years old, 8 years old, 9 years old. And what I would witness is the ease and comfort that would come at once by taking that first drink, because my mom would make these two pitchers, one called martinis and the other one called Manhattans. And my dad would walk in the house huffing and puffing. He'd be angry about something. And all of a sudden, he'd take that first drink. And as we all know here, that first drink performed the magic. And my dad would become a different person. He would become the fun guy that, the let's go in the backyard and have a catch guy. He just became a different person, and again, don't let me romance that drink, that first drink, that's what happens, because there were those days. And on some of those days, what would happen is my dad would take that first drink and the tornado would come out. And when I talk about the tornado, I would talk about, the plates coming across the kitchen, a kitchen chair being flown across the kitchen. If you grabbed one of us young kids, we'd be flying across the kitchen, So right from the get-go, from an early age, not only am I insecure, but I am afraid. I am afraid of loud noises. I'm afraid of yelling. I'm afraid of anger and violence, all that stuff which occurred in my house. Now, another problem in my neighborhood or even in my house is that nothing leaves your house. So these are not discussions I'm having on the street corners with my buddies the next day about what's going on in my house. Matter of fact, if you asked all my friends that lined us up, we wouldn't know anything that goes on in our house. And right from an early age, I learned how to internalize feelings. I learned how to shut down emotions. I learned how to, just not be, as it says in our coin, to thy own self be true. I don't know how to do those kind of things, so I just become a guy that lives like a chameleon double life, and I don't talk about any of that stuff. But, that idea of that ease and comfort that comes by a first drink, as much as, in my neighborhood, the one thing that would, with so many kids in my neighborhood, what would happen, there was always parties for something. Birthday parties, graduation parties, christenings, you name it, it was going on. And what I would witness is that the one thing that was always at these parties was king alcohol. So this idea that drinking to me equated to fun, drinking to me equated to freedom, drinking to me equated problem solved. So I'm like, even though there's something going on in my house, I can't wait to be on the other side of that coin where it looks like it's going to be a good thing. And, 50 years ago, I don't even know what I did this morning, but I can remember my first drink 50 years ago. And I'm in a cemetery with 5 guys that I can remember. And here comes that first bottle. It's Colt 45 malt liquor. I'm 13 years old. I got the strong warnings from my parents that I better not be hanging out with those kids. But here I am with those kids. And here comes that first bottle. And I put my hand in there with a lot of fear that I shouldn't be doing this, but I can't wait to do this. That whole thing that goes on in your head. And I take that first drink, my first drink at the age of 13. Here comes that second bottle. It's called Mohawk Blackberry Brandy. And I start drinking on that blackberry brandy. And very, very quickly, I realized that I found the magic elixir, that all of a sudden, all my problems were solved. Now, you might say to yourself, well, what kind of problems does a 13-year-old have? I don't know about you guys, but it seemed like I had a lot of problems. I don't know why, but I just felt like I had all these things going on inside me. But what happened on that day was, I puked purple for about 2 weeks, really. I took a beating from my father. I blacked out. My mother grounded me for life, and the hook was in. I couldn't wait to do it again. I understand something about myself, and I hope you understand something about your alcoholism. And that is, what is alcohol? What makes me alcoholic? And what I do is, look back now 50 years, and, there's a saying we throw around in AA a lot, we live life forward, but we understand it backwards. I look back 50 years now, I know what I'm up against, and I know that I have this thing called alcoholism. It doesn't look like it back then, but I can tell you now, I know what I suffer from, and it's this physical allergy to alcohol. So what happened on that night, not that I became an everyday drinker right away, but I just couldn't control the amount once I took that first drink. that I had no power, choice, and control when I took that first drink. And the first piece of the puzzle was set. The second piece of the puzzle was quickly put in, and that's called the obsession. An idea that's so strong it overcomes all other ideas. And now all of a sudden, as a 13-year-old kid, I can't wait till next Friday. I can't wait till after the dance. I can't wait till after the football game. I can't wait to recreate what that fun was that first night drinking, you know. But the third piece of the puzzle is something that I didn't even understand or even know about, so I landed into Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's the third leg of this whole thing. And that's that spirituality that's deep down within us. This soul sickness. When I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I would hear you old timers say things like this, that alcoholism is a soul sickness caused by a separation from God, a disconnect from each other. No wonder why many of us drink in loneliness and isolation at the end of our rope. But more importantly, how many of us are isolated and lonely when we come into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous? We sit in that back row, or maybe we even come on a Zoom meeting. And this is no knock at the people that don't have their videos off, but we turn our video off. And all of a sudden, at the end of the meeting, we shut the laptop down. And you know what? We're right back into our own thinking again. So this whole idea of what I suffer from, looking back, I can see it as clear as day today, alcoholism, and again, I find out later on that really my alcoholism doesn't even come in a bottle. It comes up in here in my mind. And that's what I had to learn. And that's what I'm glad I've learned. So, I'm going along, 13, 15, high school, all those fun years seemed to be fun. Alcohol was fun. There was a time when drinking was a good time. Yeah. And with all the consequences, I enjoyed it, barely got through high school, went to a prep school, dressed like this, but with a sports coat on every day. And I witnessed something as like a 17-year-old kid that, really became a part of my life. And that was the Wall Street guy coming off the train onto the public transportation. You see, back in my day, there was no yellow buses. You took public transportation home. And I would stand in that corner, and I'd look catty corner from the bus to the bar that was over there, and I'd see the guys coming off the trains from Wall Street, and they would have a brown bag. And in that brown bag, they would have, a bottle or maybe a couple of cans of beer, and they'd get on that bus, and I would watch them drink. So, the drinking age was 18. I'm a big guy. I used to have hair on my head. I had a little phony mustache back then. And so it was very easy to get, served as a 16, 17-year-old kid where I lived. And so that started my daily drinking of driving home on the bus, drinking and just drinking. And again, how we are with our rationalization and our justification and the stories we tell everyone. I go home, my mom would ask me, "Are you drinking?" Of course, deny it. My dad would be going crazy on me. I would come up with, algebra was tough. I needed to take the edge off today, So, that kind of stupidity, that's the stuff that I would do. But what I didn't see and what I didn't know until I started to look back was how this progression of this illness called alcoholism started to take hold in my life. And now I'm starting to become an everyday drinker by the age of 18 years old. Now, again, I'm not drinking to get loaded every day. I'm just drinking because that's what the alcoholic life looks like, right? You just have a few drinks. You have a few drinks at lunchtime. You have a few drinks before you go to bed. And then before you know it, you're drinking in the morning, you're drinking in the afternoon, and, and on we go. And what happened was, not only was my drinking becoming progressive, my behaviors were starting to become progressive. And being a guy that lived on the streets and hung on the streets, I started to do things that were not, let's just call them criminal in nature. And again, this was heartbreaking to my parents because, they never sat me down and taught me how to break into a car or break into a house. It just became part of my life, this criminal activity to pay for what I needed. And, I look back and somewhere along the lines, God cracked my skull open, and he put this chalkboard in my head. And on the chalkboard, there's these three emotions, shame, guilt, and remorse. And it seemed like for a long period of my life, everything I've done created one of those emotions or touched on one of those emotions. The shame of being a failure and, in my parents' eyes, almost failing out of school. I mean, on and on with all the shame, relationships and jobs and on, the guilt of the things I was doing, the remorse of hurting people that cared about me, loved about me. And see, I fell under another delusion, is that when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I thought I could outrun that stuff. But thank God for the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous that made me confront that stuff. So what happened is eventually I went on and, I went on to the greatest 10 years of my life. That's called college. I mean, 9 friends of mine, we went out to the wilds of Pennsylvania, and it was just like that movie Animal House. And it was just, total destruction and just drinking. To be honest with you, I wish I could have made 10 years. It was really 1 year when I was asked to leave this university, and I came back to New Jersey. And, again, I have no education. I have no trade. I have no, really hook into a union job. So this really starts just my, walking down to the corner bar on a daily basis and just drinking around the clock. Now, granted, unlike many of us, I had dreams. I had aspirations. I had goals. I wanted to do things with my life. I wanted to go places in my life. But what I didn't understand is I took the first drink. You see, I didn't understand the power of the first drink. And when I came to AA, and you guys would say the first drink gets you drunk, I thought that was the most corniest and ridiculous thing I've ever heard. I just didn't get that. I thought it was the last, 20 drinks and the outside issues that I was taking that was really causing my problems. It took me a while to understand that concept, that when I take that first drink, all bets are off. Not only that, I started to live on this other delusion, this double-edged sword that maybe some of us land in. Like one side of me is blaming everyone for the way I feel, but there's also a side of me that's always seeking something out there to make myself feel better inside. And whether it's drinking, drugs, money, girls, cars, you name it, there was always this search for something. There has to be something, because I'm not an alcoholic. Alcoholics are those guys that are under the bridge, or the homeless guys I see in the city. That's an alcoholic. So, at this time, I'm like 25 years old. Life seems to be moving on for everyone but me. I feel like I'm in quicksand. I'm not really moving. I see my buddies and my friends, they're starting to leave the life. They're starting to get into a real life of, relationships and jobs and children and all that other stuff. And though I wanted all that stuff, little did I know is I take that first drink and those things seem like a high wire act that I can't pull that stuff off. And what happens is I'm in a bar one day, and I see a beautiful girl, and this is how I do relationships, ladies. I grab my sister. I tell her I'll buy her an illegal substance if she introduces me. She does. 7 months later, I'm married, and that's how I do relationships. There's no courting, as they used to say in the old days. There's no really getting to know each other. It's really taking a hostage and under the delusion that this will fix me, even though I don't even know what's wrong with me. But I do know what's wrong with me. I got this belly and a soul filled with a darkness that I don't even know how to talk about. This violence that I grew up with, the violence that I'm living on the streets, the insecurities, the fears, you name it. I got all this stuff, and I don't know what to do with that stuff. I just pour booze on it, and I think that's the solution. But I jumped into this marriage, and, I don't care about her. I don't care about me. I'm irresponsible. I'm non-caring. I barely have a job at this point. But I think this is a good idea. And 40 months into the marriage, I walk out of the marriage because drinking's more important than being a married man. I do what most cowards do. I run when things get tough. I run. I'm a runner, a good runner. I don't want to face reality. I don't want to face anything. Very immature in a way, and very just a guy that just doesn't want to face the heat, right? So I run. And I run out of this marriage, and I take off from my home away from home, which is Boca Raton, Florida, where I'm always down in Florida with friends. I'm 25 years old at this time. I'm in a beautiful condo overlooking the beach in Boca Raton. It's all glass. I'm in this apartment. I could see the beach. I could see the boats. I could see the bikinis. I could see everything a man would seems to want. But I'm getting that knock, the knock that we all get at this time. And the knock is the 4 horsemen of terror, frustration, bewilderment, and despair. Every day I'm waking up restless, irritable, discontent. Every day I'm waking up with this unbelievable shame and guilt and remorse, what I've done to this woman, with my family, the life I'm living. But I have a solution for it. It's called Johnny Walker Red. And you see, I'm at the point of my drinking now that I don't even need to take that first drink. I just need to crack the seal of a bottle of whiskey. And I could already feel the sense of ease and comfort that comes at once by taking that first drink. And I take that first drink. And all of a sudden, I become a little perfect kid. All of a sudden, it's somebody else's fault for the way I feel deep down inside. And I don't know what to do but blame others for the way I'm living my life. What happens eventually is I come to New Jersey, back to New Jersey. And I am so riddled and crippled by the way I'm feeling about myself and the things I've done to people that I decide not to call anyone when I come back. And I wound up living on the streets for the next 19 months of my life. Now, if you live on the streets, you probably know this already, that one night on the street is one night too many. But what happened to me over those 18 and 19 months is I almost became subhuman, where I just shut down so emotionally. I just shut down in every capacity or every way you could think of. And I just kind of seemed like lost time. I didn't even know I was on the streets as long as I was on the streets. I was just living this life of panhandling and stealing and putting my head down wherever I could put down and drinking around the clock and just blaming people for the way I feel. You know, what happened one night is I walked into a bar. And I went in a bar for a couple of reasons. One is to get money, panhandle, steal, whatever I needed to do. And I walked into this bar, and this old timer that I knew from the neighborhood came up to me and goes, "Jimmy, they're hiring people like you in Newark Airport." I'm like, "What do you mean people like me?" Well, and he kind of put it kindly. He said, "Guys that are down on their luck that need a job, there's an airline called People's Express that hire guys like you. And the idea of the job is all you need to do is take the luggage that's over there and put it on the plane that's over there." Now, I like to segue right here and just let you know that if you flew through Newark Airport in the mid-'80s and you're still waiting for your luggage, I'll make amends after this meeting, but that's something separate. Anyway, I wound up going to Newark Airport that next day with two other guys who are now in AA. And what we did was we stole a car to get to Newark Airport, which was only about 20 minutes away from my house. And we go to Newark Airport, and guys, I don't know how to put it into words. I'm sure you all have your own words of how you felt in those last days of your drinking. And I couldn't put it into words how sick I was, how desperate I was. I'm 29 years old now, and I look like I was 129 years old. And it wasn't until I came to Alcoholics Anonymous and I read Bill's story, and on page 8, when I read Bill's first step experience, that he put words to my bottom and maybe to your bottom, because what he writes is that no words could tell the loneliness and despair I felt in a bitter morass of self-pity. Quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I met my match. I've been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master. And at the age of just turning 29, I started to realize that maybe drinking is a problem. And as I sat in Newark Airport in this hangar, it was like half of a hangar. It was a pretty big room. And all these chairs were in a circle. I sat down in a circle, and then all of a sudden, a complete stranger sat next to me. And at this time, people weren't asking me how my 401k was doing or how my kids were doing or how anything was doing in my life. This gentleman just looked at me and said, "What's your problem?" And for whatever reason, well, I know the reason today, it's God's grace. I spit up my life story on this guy in about 10 minutes. And all he said was, so he looked at me and said, "I have the solution for you." I said, "What's that?" Now, this is pre-cell phone and pre-beeper days. You know, he pulled out a piece of paper and he wrote down a street. He said, "You know where this street is?" I said, "Yep, that's in my old neighborhood." He put a number in front of this street. He said, "Try not to drink the rest of this day." And I was honest with him. I said, "I want to drink right now." He goes, "Try not to drink the rest of this day and be in front of that address at 7:00 tonight." I had no reason. I had no idea what he was talking about. And I can tell you that this is where God was really just directing me on that day, because I didn't take a drink. And more importantly, at 7:00 that night, with my knees knocking in fear, like, what am I doing? I'm standing in front of this address when a 1979 Chevy Impala pulls up. And in that car was the stranger with a bunch of other strangers. And they said, "The most spiritual thing you'll ever hear in AA, get in the car." And I got in the car. And they drove me around the corner to my grammar school. And who knew, who knew it was AA? For years, I thought it was bingo. It was AA. I didn't even know, And they walked me into my first meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And guys, let me tell you, man, walking down that set of stairs in my grammar school brought back a flood of emotion and a flood of memories that I didn't even know existed. I think every Catholic school in America is painted. The floors are painted with battleship gray paint. And that was the first thing I noticed. Walking down there, this school hasn't changed. As I walked down that hallway with these guys, I looked into that cafeteria where I sat as a 6th grader, a 7th grader, an 8th grader. And yeah, that kid, the kid that had all these dreams and goals and aspirations, but also that kid that had a lot of secrets and was living really a double life and who stuffed every emotion that he ever had. But I was a kid that when I looked in that cafeteria, I wanted a way out. Little did I know it was going to be Alcoholics Anonymous. As I walked down to the end of that hall, I met the most important person you'll ever meet in Alcoholics Anonymous. We call him the greeter. And that night, that greeter put his hand out to me, and I grabbed that flimsy reader, and he pulled me into the room of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I've been with you guys ever since, and that was on March 28th, 1987. And what I could tell you is that when he pulled me into that room, those people gave me something that I think we all are responsible to give any newcomer that walks into the door, or any old timer, or anyone, really. They gave me a piece of dignity that night because they didn't judge what I looked like. They didn't care that I smelled. They didn't care that every other word out of my mouth was a profanity. Matter of fact, the guy that shook my hand the first time got me a half a cup of coffee. He said, maybe you should sit in the front row. That's a good place to listen. And more importantly, he kept on saying to me, just keep coming back, kid. Keep coming back. And I can remember 3 specific days, and probably the most important days of my life in early AA. Day 1, day 2, and day 7, because on day 1, this guy, Richie Schnorr, who was that stranger who 12-stepped me in Newark Airport, he walked up to me and said, by the way, I'm your sponsor, and this is your home group. And I don't know what a sponsor is. I don't even know what a home group is, but apparently I had him on day 1. You know, thank God I didn't have to go through the interview process, right? Thank God that he just came up to me and said, I'm your sponsor, and this is what we're going to do. I'm going to tell you how they treated you back then in those days. That night, after we had that meeting, and I don't know what the hell went on in that meeting. I just know that after the meeting, they took me to the diner, a whole bunch of guys, and they started to talk to me about a bunch of stuff I didn't understand. At the end of that diner, we went to a hotel where those guys put me up in a hotel. The next morning, they came back, and what they brought back for me was some clothes, because all I had was on the clothes on my back. So they bought me a bunch of T-shirts, a couple of pairs of jeans. They bought me a pair of Chuck Taylor Converse sneakers. And they brought me to that hotel. And they said, we'll get you in the morning. That next morning when I woke up or came to or whatever, it was almost like I was in a dream. Like, what the hell's going on? But I could tell you something really important that happened on that next morning on day 2. I shared an emotion. You might be saying, Jimmy, what are you talking about, shared an emotion? I was so shut down from the way I felt. I was so blocked off from anything that was going on in me. I was almost like a wall around me that I wasn't letting you in it, and I wasn't letting myself out. And there was so many things inside of me that I don't even know how to discuss, talk about, feel, whatever, that I just shut down. But what happened on that next morning when this guy Richie picked me up, I shared something that tough guys like me don't share. I told him I was scared. And he asked me, why was I scared? I said, because I want to drink today. And he goes, I know you do. And what I witnessed is what a trusted servant in Alcoholics Anonymous does. He called up his wife and said, take me off the calendar for today. I'm going to be with a newcomer. And that day he took me to 3 meetings. He fed me 3 times. I must have drank 700 cups of coffee that day. I was flying around all over the place, but I felt like I was a member of you guys. I felt like I just stepped into something, though I could not describe it or tell you how I felt. It was different from the way I was living, and I liked it. I loved AA right from the get-go. I feel very fortunate that I fell in love with Alcoholics Anonymous and you people right from the go. That didn't mean I like all of you, but I loved the feeling that I was starting to get. You know, day 7 comes. Now I'm in a one-room bed. I'm in a whatever you call it, 1-bedroom apartment, or not apartment, like a, I don't know, it was like a dump, really. That's what it was. That's where they put me up for a while. And on day 7, I was at a business meeting. Glenn talked about your business meeting the other night. It was a doozy. This was a doozy because I didn't know what the hell was going on. And during that meeting, this guy, Richie, walked up to me and goes, listen, I want you to be the ashtray cleaner. And I looked at him. I didn't say anything, obviously. But I looked at him and said, I'm not cleaning ashtrays. What are you, out of your mind? But thank God, I paid attention to that small little voice that's inside of all of us, that intuitive feeling. Because my rationalization was, even though I have put every possible substance in my body, I'd never smoked a cigarette in my life. So why would I have to clean ashtrays? But I paid attention to them. And all I can tell you is from day 7 to this moment right now, I have been tethered to Alcoholics Anonymous through a service position, whether it's through my home group, whether it's through my district, or whether it's been through my area, that I've had a job in Alcoholics Anonymous doing something for the last 34 years of my life. And I got to tell you, the people that I have known who have stayed have had a job in Alcoholics Anonymous. And the people I know that have left haven't had a job in Alcoholics Anonymous. Sounds pretty simplistic to me. So that's really my first week. And, again, my life started to get better very quickly, very quickly. There was a point when I got sober, a little bit more, time under my belt. I would hear you guys talking about the power of God and how God helped you. And I was always like doubtful of all that stuff. Like, yeah, I'm a good Catholic boy, but, really, what does God have to do with all this stuff? But I look back today and I see how God has been in my life from the get-go. From the family I had, from living on the streets even. I could see God in my life back then. I like to share this story. I was 18 months sober, and here's where God will show up without your permission and do things that you never thought you would do. 18 months sober. I'm working a midnight shift. I have a union job now. I'm doing really well. I'm back with my wife, the wife I walked out with. And I walked into my parents' home and I found my father dead. And my father was on the ground in the house, and I'm looking at him. Never dealt with death on this kind of level. I've seen people die on the street, but I never dealt with someone this close to me. I looked down the hallway. I could see my mother crying. I don't know what to do. I'm pretty programmed now. I call my sponsor immediately. I said to him, here's what's going on. My dad's dead. Just found him. He's 63 years old, the same age I am right now. So he said, all right, let's call 911, call 911, and let's pray. And we started to pray together. He said, just wait for 911, the cops or the EMTs to show up. First cop shows up. He's taking down all the information. He's staring at me, kind of weird. And I said, what's up? He goes, didn't I arrest you once? And as I looked at him, I said, you arrested me more than once, that's for sure. But he goes, I don't see you walking the streets anymore. I said, yeah, I don't do that anymore. He says, matter of fact, I used to go into this particular bar that you were always in, and I don't see you in there anymore drinking. I said, yeah, I don't drink anymore. And he goes, we started to have a conversation about drinking. And I said, yeah, I go to this thing called Alcoholics Anonymous, and apparently it's working. I'm not drinking 18 months now. And what I didn't understand at the time was that I was just about to do my first 12-step call on somebody that I didn't even know was called the 12-step call. And I started talking to this cop about my drinking. And I started to talk about the life I have already in 18 months of sobriety. All I can tell you is this. Brian S., that was that cop that night, stopped drinking. And he went to Alcoholics Anonymous. And Brian S. just celebrated 32 years this year. And not that I have the power to get anyone sober, but God will always use us to be a link in the chain. And see, sometimes I could be dead asleep to that. Sometimes I could walk past a person in my home group and not extend my hand. I think we have a great responsibility to stay awake when we walk into our rooms or even on a Zoom room. If we see someone we don't see that looks familiar, maybe on a meeting today, and just ask if they're okay. Because like I said earlier, it's pretty easy just to close the laptop down. That's the benefit of in-person meetings. So we have the meeting before the meeting, we have the meeting after the meeting out in the parking lot or even to the diner, that we get to help people on that kind of level. So here I am, I'm going good. I'm back with the wife, got the union job. I got a house. I got all the things you would want really quickly, And to the untrained eye, it looks like normal living is the solution to alcoholism. But here I am 5 years without a drink and I'm ready to die. I'm ready to die because I have a rope in my hands and I'm ready to go off a bridge because guess what? I'm suffering from something I don't understand I'm suffering from or even know how to talk about. We call it untreated alcoholism. Because at 5 years physically sober, I'm under another delusion. And the delusion is this, that if I just don't drink or abstinence is going to be the solution to a spiritual problem. But at 5 years without a drink, I am in trouble again. And the reason why is because I still got this belly filled with fear and anger and insecurities. Yes, I am physically sober. I am physically not drinking, but nothing else has changed in my life. And at 5 years without a drink, I'm speaking at a meeting and I'm lying to every one of you because I'm paralyzed by what you think of me. And I'm talking about the second step and about this relationship with God when I really don't have one. And at the end of a meeting, a man walks up to me. I'm 6'4". He was 6'4", eyeball to eyeball. He looked at me and said, "You're screwed," in a little bit saltier language. And see, I'm at the point of my sobriety, or I'm in a point in my life where I don't know how to face resistance with no resistance. I don't know how to face confrontation without violence. I'm still the same guy I was, just not drinking, basically. And I want to hit this guy in a meeting of AA because I'm feeling intimidated. But I take a step back and I look in this man's eyes and I said, "You're right. I need help." And I find myself that next afternoon in a railroad room apartment in Jersey City overlooking the New York skyline. And I'm getting a spiritual test. Maybe some of you guys have gotten a spiritual test by someone who cares about you. And his first thing that he asked me, this gentleman that next day, his name was Bill Grace from St. Paul, Minnesota, same place where my sponsor is from now. He looked at me and said, "How long can you hold your breath? How long can you be in a 12-step program and not work the 12 steps?" Apparently 5 years. He asked me what my relationship with God looks like. Well, I believe in God, I guess. I'm a Catholic boy, but really, what's God have to do with this? He asked me what makes me alcoholic. And I looked at him and I don't know, I stammered a little bit and I drink too much. I had no idea about the physical allergy. I had no idea about the phenomena called craving. I had no idea about the obsession. I had no idea about that spiritual malady that's deep down in every one of us. He asked me a question that most of you might not believe, but this is the way it was in my neighborhood. Maybe it was in your neighborhood in the late 80s and early 90s. He asked me where my big book was, and I looked at him and said, "What's a big book?" Now, I'm sure a big book was on a literature table or at a podium, but we weren't encouraged to go into steps early in those days. The meetings in my area were speaker meetings, discussion meetings, some 12 and 12 meetings, but not on the level of how they are today, the meetings. There wasn't workshops on the big book. That didn't start happening until after Joe and Charlie started to come out, and we started to do that kind of stuff. Then he gave me a consideration, or more, I don't know, question, consideration. He said, "Jimmy, if AA works, why do you have so many problems?" Because I'm not working AA. I'm just not drinking. Yeah, I'm showing up and I'm doing the fellowship part of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm on that one side of the triangle with unity and showing up and being a good group member. But I'm missing a boat on recovery and I'm missing a boat on service. I'm really not doing that stuff at all. And that really started my path in Alcoholics Anonymous. Bill Grace painted a picture of belief that I have today of what the two goals of Alcoholics Anonymous are. First goal is the obvious one. Don't pick up the first drink. But the second one is the more important one, I believe, today. And that's that we all need to step into the sunlight of the Spirit. And what does that mean? That means there's a place in all of us that we can get where we can experience all the promises in our literature. A place where we could have a relationship with a power greater than ourselves. A place where we have that sense of freedom and where the bondage of self isn't running the show. When I sit downstairs at my kitchen table with a gentleman, we go through the steps. That's what we talk about. And I point down this dark hallway that I have to my right, and there's a glass door out into the beautiful sunlight of the Jersey Shore today. But I tell him, like I was told that day, that in order to get out into the sunlight of the Spirit, I got to walk through the darkness of my life. And I got to uncover, discover, and discard the things in me, these things that I've been holding on to. These are the things I need to start addressing. The common manifestations of living a life on self-will. And see, that's the scary part. Because I thought I could neatly evade this stuff and not have to talk about this stuff. But if I really wanted to be free, he told me, I'm going to have to walk through that stuff. I read it all the time because it's one of the greatest readings we have. It comes out of a book called Daily Reflections, like you read earlier. And you guys are probably familiar with this reading, but it's from May 1st. And what Bill writes in that Daily Reflections, it's a side of myself that I refuse to look at that rules me. I must be willing to look at the dark side in order to heal my mind and my heart, because that's the road to freedom. I must walk into darkness to find the light and walk into fear to find peace. In order to get free, I have to uncover, discover, discard. I got to do something that looks like weakness, but is really strength in disguise. And that's called being vulnerable and talking with another man and sitting with another man. You see, and when I started to do that, when I started to bring the walls of indifference down between me and everyone in my life started to change. As I sat at that kitchen table and I started to understand what I was up against, you see, there's nowhere in our literature that AA says that AA is about us quitting drinking. It's just quite the opposite. You can't stop drinking. You're powerless. You have no mental defense. Lack of power is your dilemma. And what AA has been designed to do is to introduce us to the great reality. And if AA doesn't do that, we're all dead men walking. And see, when I got into the chapter of We Agnostics, that was the wake-up call. Because I walked around here with a lot of old ideas and contempt towards God, towards goodness, towards anything that would help me, because I was a self-made person. And I thought because I think I could fix me, I didn't need your help or especially God's help. But as I started to go through those steps, when I got on my knees with another man and held his hands and started to, make that decision that my life run on my will has hardly been a success, that playing God doesn't work, that if anything, understand this, not only are you powerless over drinking and drugs, you're powerless over something really more important, and that's control. And that's the great news for us. See, nobody has to change in my life in order for me to get better. I just got to change. And that was the great news. So as I started to do the inventory, as I started to walk through the steps, I did that thorough inventory. I got down to the common manifestations. I looked at these resentments. I looked at all this anger, the shit, all the daddy issues I had, all that stuff, and I got it on paper. I looked at all the fears. Here's another delusion. I'm a tough guy from the streets. I have no fear. I'm riddled with fear. And then all the harms that I've caused sexually, emotionally, financially, spiritually, right? And when I got it all on paper, I had a long talk. The greatest day of my life was my original fit step. Well, I shouldn't say that. The greatest day of my life was my 2 children being born. But that same emotion when I did my original fit step was like when my daughter was brand new born and that doctor handed me that baby. My heart cracked open with a love and emotion I never knew existed. Same thing 3 years later when my son was born. That doctor handed me to my son. I couldn't believe I was a father to 2 children, from homelessness to fatherhood. How does that happen? And as I shared that fit step for a real long talk with Bill, he gave me those instructions when I was done. And the instructions was to take that hour, read those first 5 steps. Are your stones properly in place? I went to a place called Liberty State Park. I didn't go home and take the book off my shelf. I went to this park, which overlooks Manhattan. And I sat down and I started to read that paragraph on page 75. I looked to my right, and what I could see maybe a quarter mile to my right was the Statue of Liberty. I could look over the Hudson River, and right in front of me was the World Trade Center. I looked to my left, and there's this place called Ellis Island where a lot of our immigrant families came through. And when I looked at those 3 places, I thought of one thing and one thing only: freedom. And here I am as a 32-year-old kid, I like to say, sitting on the end of this pier looking at these places of freedom. And I sat free myself on that day. And I could feel the arms of God wrapped around me. And for the first time in my life, I felt okay. And okay was pretty good. Because for a kid who was filled with anger, resentments, and fear, and insecurities, and you name it, I sat there with tears coming down my eyes, and I felt okay. And I don't have enough time to tell you that, I fell for the big trap. We all know what the big trap is. I fell prey to comfortability. And since I did this fit step, I thought I could take a coffee break. And what happens is, I like to explain it this way. There's an ocean right here. I could take the boat out on the ocean, and I could point the boat east, right? And if I point the boat east, all I'm going to see is the curvature of the earth. I'm going to see the horizon, and it's the same picture every day, right? But what I don't see, and this is what happens to many of us in recovery, is though I'm looking this way, I don't see how I'm drifting from town to town to town, how I come off the beam in Alcoholics Anonymous very quickly. And though I had a powerful experience with 5, I started to, put my foot on the brake and rest on my laurels. I always forget that next line. We're headed for trouble if we do, 10 years sober. I blow up my life at 10 years sober. I'm untreated again. Again, I'm not that guy that gets on that spiritual rocket ship and goes up, up, and away. My sobriety seems to be grow, hit a wall, grow, hit a wall, grow, hit a wall. And I'm hitting a wall at 10 years sobriety. But this time I do what most cowards do. I run. And I run out of my marriage into the arms of a woman who understands. And I blow up my life. I'm the guy the book talks about in the fifth step when it says we build a beautiful spiritual structure up for ourselves and for our families, and we tear it down with a senseless series of sprees. And I'm here to tell you, you don't need to be drinking to blow your life up in Alcoholics Anonymous. Just sponsor a bunch of guys, and you'll find that out, right? And here I am, 10 years, and I blow my life up in AA. And I walk out on a family that really cared about me. That's the level of selfishness and self-centeredness I can live with in sobriety. And at 13 years sober of living that double life, what I do is, I lie to all of you. I tell my sponsor about 20% of what's really going on. I'm living the secrets. I'm living a deeper life. And I can't take it anymore. And I walk into a bar at 13 years without a drink, and I order a drink. I understand what Dr. Bob's talking about in his nightmare when he says he's stuck between a rock and a hard place, because I don't want that drink, but God damn it, I need a drink because the pain is so great in my life. And see, the devil and the angel pop out on my shoulder, drink it, don't drink it, drink it, don't drink it. And I'm staring down that drink, and then all of a sudden a hand goes around that drink and pulls it back. And when I look up, it just happens to be one of you guys who happens to be a bartender in a bartender, not in Alcoholics Anonymous, but a member of AA who's a bartender. And he looks at me and said, "What are you doing?" Apparently throwing my life away. And what happened was 2 weeks later, I take my tail and I put it between my legs, and, I blow up my life, and at this time I get in a major, major accident on the job where I've had 41 operations since 2001. I've had 12 back operations. I had 5 discs removed. My neck collapsed. I had 3 discs in my neck. I've had 3 knee replacements. I just had another knee replacement. I'm really 5'8", but after they put all the metal in me, I'm 6'4". It's a miracle how that happens. But I wouldn't advise it that way. But that's the way it is with me. And I meet a guy in a meeting. And this just shows you the mentality of the alcoholic, this alcoholic. I want to kill myself 2 weeks early, but 2 weeks later, I'm in a meeting listening to him, Peter M., who many of you guys know, and I'm judging him because this guy's too good to be true. This guy's got to be a fraud. That's how crazy I am. But I accosted him afterwards, and, he becomes my sponsor for the next 17 years of my sobriety. We start to go through some really deep spiritual exercises where I start to really uncover, discover, peel that onion back and start looking at things I've never looked at before. My life really gets transformed. Go through divorce, go through all these surgeries, meet a woman in AA. I'm the guy who's never going to get married again until I get married again. My wife's a member of the Tower Group, the World Trade Center group. As you know, the towers come down, members die in that group. Matter of fact, they're having their 20th anniversary this Saturday. They're having a Zoom meeting for the 20-year Tower Group. That's going on this Saturday. And I get married, and my life starts to get better and better and better. And my life just gets unbelievable as the years have gone on. Me and Peter become like brothers. I need a new voice in my head. I get a new sponsor, on and on and on. And I'll just end with this. A couple things. Where God has brought me in Alcoholics Anonymous. We started a group down here on the Jersey Shore in January of 2006. We wanted to do a big book meeting. We had a steering committee downstairs in my living room. We, hammered out on the anvil of experience, like Bill talks about on the traditions of starting a group, a big book group. We go to prayer. We pray that 30 people would show up. First night, 175 people. We're normally about 300 people every Sunday night, a pocket of enthusiasm. You walk in the mirror, you could feel the spirit of God, the spirit of AA, right away. I mean, there's 2 women over there reading. There's 2 guys over there reading. A bunch of guys around the coffee pot talking about the football game. I mean, it's the meeting before the meeting, the heartbeat of AA, the home group. After that, the parking lot's huge. It's like 500 cars in a parking lot. Everyone's in a parking lot, gathered in 2s, 3s, and 4s, having their conversations. I love it. I just love my home group. And I hope you love your home group. But we decided to become a group rather than a meeting. I hope you know the difference. But we become a group. They need a GSR. I'm 19 years sober at the time. I have contempt towards service. I don't believe in it. I don't even know it because I'm afraid. I don't want to ask questions. So I don't believe in any of that stuff. But I reluctantly raise my hand. I become the GSR. I don't know what a GSR is. I went to a district meeting 18 years earlier, thought it was like a union meeting. Who needs this crap? And what happens is I meet two guys at a service convention down in Hunt Valley, Maryland, and they become the guys that I get under their wings, and they start to show me that Alcoholics Anonymous is just much bigger than not drinking. And they start to introduce me to the third side of this deal, the third legacy of service. And I don't have enough time to tell you, but I started to make myself available. I became a DCM, blah, 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 all the way down. I have the honor and the privilege of serving my area right now, Northern New Jersey, Area 44. I'm the delegate to the General Service Conference. I'm in my first year. Can't believe how fast this has gone. I'm getting ready already. I got elected a chairperson for my Treatment and Accessibilities Committee for next year. It's just been a whirlwind of unbelievable things that I never could tell you that this would happen to a guy like me, from homelessness to delegate. How's that happen? And everything in between. But I'll tell you, this guy John gave me a book once. It's called The Service Manual. Most people don't read that book, but I'll tell you what it says in the Service Manual. There's a little excerpt on S20 if you ever want to open that up, from a non-alcoholic. His name was Burns Smith. He was Bill Wilson's personal lawyer. And he writes in there, why do we have a conference? Why do we do the things we do in Alcoholics Anonymous? We don't do it to ensure our sobriety. We're here. We know what to do. Glenn knows what to do when the newcomer comes. Suzanne knows what to do in Arizona when those new girls show up at her meeting, right? Why we do the things we do in AA is for the guy who's out there right now that doesn't know we're in here right now. And what he writes in that little excerpt is that right now there's a man somewhere in Greeneville, Tennessee, who's drinking his afternoon away because he doesn't know there's a solution to his problem right here. Right now, there's a single mom somewhere between my house and your house who can't wait to put those kids down so she can crack a bottle of wine and just wash her daily. Right now, from my house to your house, there's a baby being born destined for alcoholism in some hospital somewhere. So I came to understand that I have a responsibility in Alcoholics Anonymous. Though I am one individual member, I need to be more responsible. And I know what that responsibility is to make sure that the doors of AA are always open for that guy or woman or that child who's just like me on March 28, 1987, who looks lost. You see, walking into grace doesn't look like walking into grace. It really looks like walking out of chaos. But when we come here, we get the grace of God, and we're given a gift. Bill talks about in the 12 and 12, we're given a priceless gift. The question I ask you, and I've been asked all the time, and I need to ask myself is, what am I doing with this gift? Am I passing it on? Because really, that's what we do here. We just don't drink, help others. And as an old timer used to say, when you think of a drink, reach for a drunk. Because I can give you a lot of facts, figures. I could talk about the structure of AA, up and down, the concepts, you name it. But it comes down to this. AA is like a big funnel. And if we drop everything into the funnel, when it comes out at the bottom, it's really about one drunk talking to another. That's all I got. Thank you.